Hey guys, it's the Conic, and I just made a very big swap to the high budget variant of the Wretched Defiler build and saw a huge increase in survivability as well as damage. However, with us not having a mage blood just yet, it came with a bit of adjustments I had to make. So we're going to be covering those kind of adjustments that we made and what else the swap entailed pretty much. So the first and biggest and honestly most expensive part of the swap is having to convert 100% of your fire and lightning damage to cold damage, or basically your elemental to one element, and chaos damage, so you can focus your suffixes on only two resistance types as well as intelligence, because we do drop a bunch of intelligence on the tree. And for that we use a Sublime Vision with Purity of Ice to convert 30% to ice, and then we use a Watcher's Eye with a mod that converts 20% of fire and lightning to cold, affected by Purity of Ice, which is basically 50% total. And then we pair that with a Glorious Vanity that has Divine Flesh. You would know that it has Divine Flesh because it calls the name of Zibakwa basically. You also want to get one that has a decent seed. It doesn't necessarily need to be the one in my PoE, because that one I've been watching out for it, and the prices people are trying to sell that it's not worth 100 div, it's not worth 50 div. You can get something else. I'm currently using 2009, but after this video odds are this number is going to disappear as well. So basically the priority is getting at least 2 physical damage reduction nodes, and past that you can go for like block spell, block attack are nice, max chaos is really good. There are a bunch of like other nodes you can get within the impossible escapes range that can compensate for the lack of PDR. So don't overspend for the physical damage reduction. It's worth a lot, but it's not worth that much. So but yeah, and also the Sublime Vision lately has been going up in price egregiously. Like, it's insane. Last I checked it was about 50 to 60. I bought mine 30. And this is a temporary solution, but if you're trying to swap and that is looking unattainable, you might be better off going for a Purity of Lightning variant. So basically you'd be converting all your damage taken to lightning while affected by Purity of Lightning. So you'd get the Sublime Vision, which would be considerably cheaper, as well as the Watcher's Eye, which would be considerably cheaper. Now with this variant you have to run Purity of Lightning, so it has a lower ceiling than the Ice variant, because now you're giving your Mercenary lightning res actively, so you have to use a minus lightning res amulet to compensate. So you're not going to have the benefits we're getting from our current amulet, which is like max endurance charges and a lot of aura effects. You're not going to get that, but you do get the defensive benefits that we currently have. And eventually you do want to swap to Sublime Vision, Purity of Ice, and Watcher's Eye when you can afford the Sublime Vision. But I just want to put this out there as a potential alternative to the very expensive Purity of Ice variant right now. If you're enjoying the content and you haven't already, do consider liking and subscribing, as it helps a lot with the algorithm and with our 2025 goal of getting 2,000 subs, after which I will be doing a face reveal on stream and here on YouTube. So looking a bit more at my character, so I can just briefly show what exactly the swap entailed for me. I crafted my gloves and my boots with intelligence essences to make sure I had a lot of intelligence from here. But because I currently am using a convoking one instead of a convening, which I would honestly prefer convening, but I have what I have, right? Because of that, I actually still have to get a bit of intelligence here to cross the threshold to still be able to use my 242 int requirements wand. So just keep in mind, this is a very, very intensive swap, so you might need to get a lot of intelligence. Now, if you're not ready to quite use spell suppress on your gear yet, you can potentially cut this part out and still use some portions here to again maintain some int, but it's still not going to be a lot because of how much int this area blocks. Like, every single small node was 10 int, and it's just not that anymore. And my Zibakwa, like I said, this is 2009, so it has max chaos res here, it has block spell, block AD, and PDR here and PDR here. So very, very good Glorious Vanity. If you don't know how to find a Glorious Vanity that has the required stats, there are lots of guides out there. There's many useful tools for it as well, so just it shouldn't take you long to find a good video for that. And on the note of spell suppression, even with this, I had to still sacrifice some points to get more spell suppress, and I got very lucky getting spell suppress on my boots, T1 spell suppress. and I still had to get extra spell suppress notes. So just keep in mind, you will likely have to get more spell suppress notes if you want to cap. You don't necessarily have to get to 100% because spell suppress realistically was a defensive layer I added as an afterthought to just become even more tanky, but it's not necessary. It's not completely necessary you hit 100%, but you want to get as high as possible. So if you wanted to do that, I would sacrifice some life notes coming from like here and maybe some from here to get some extra points in here to compensate for probably not getting spell suppress on your boots. Other than that, you should be fine. And eventually you do want to get a better chest than I do. I'm still using my low budget chest piece. I will craft one soon enough. I just haven't gotten around to. And also for a Storm Shroud, which is our source of ailment immunity, we did not go for a chance to avoid shock boots. We instead went for chance to avoid shock ghastly eye jewels in our belt, which has increased effect, which means I'm very overcapped on chance to avoid shock and effectively ailment immune. Now, because we had to drop Purity of Elements and Commander of Darkness for our Doriani Mercenary, this means our minions and our Mercenary are no longer ailment immune. So you do have to figure out their res situation in a bit. I haven't figured it out yet. So as we'll go over in a bit, there are some potential repercussions for that. And past that, we have our Megalomaniac. It's only 2 passive. We don't have the 3rd one yet, but this is honestly fine enough. Just get Enduring Composure and Dread March, and you're chilling. And if you had to pick one, you just go for Enduring Composure on a regular small Cluster Jewel and eventually switch to a Megalomaniac when you can find one that has 2 of them. This actually just helps a lot with minion survivability, basically. Now, on the note of Mercenary, because with the swap came a shift in how our Mercenary is built, which also created a ripple effect in how we set up our minions. So I'll try to go over everything right now. It's the same thing I said in the previous videos about the high budget, what you need. But the TLDR is, with the Mercenary, when I swapped, I dropped Purity of Elements, so his res was no longer capped. And this meant that running content was a bit spicy. Now, he still didn't die until I took him to Uber Eater, where he did die because his non-lightning res was still uncapped and I hadn't really made the swap yet. So now, yes, like yesterday, we crafted a bunch of gear to make sure his res was almost basically capped. His fire is 70%. His code is overcapped because I have Purity of Ice, so I give him a lot of code res. And then his Chaos res is capped. Now, I gave him Calling Strike gloves, which was a very big one with double res and then life. This allowed me to drop my Calling Strike Spectre, the Perfect Forest Warrior, and add another Defiler. So now I have 3 support Spectres and 9 main DPS Spectres. I still have a Dark Seer, and my helmets, I crafted an elevated enemy stick elemental damage. So it went from 6% to 9%. It is really nice to have this. If you can't afford, if you don't know how to craft it, it's just essence spam until you get the enemy increased elemental damage. When you get that, if you have an open suffix, you want to multi-mod and then block your suffixes and reforge lightning. That way you're guaranteed a shaper mod because only a shaper lightning mod that exists. And then you Orb of Dominance for a 50-50 to hit, to elevate your increased enemy stick increased elemental damage. If you win, congratulations. That's the ideal scenario because now you can craft a 3rd suffix, in which case you probably want to get some more res. Let me check real quick. Yes, I just checked, and life regeneration is a modifier as a suffix. So if you do life regeneration rate, so if you do have a spare suffix, that is not a bad idea to put it there. I have rarity, it is what it is. And then the main defense here, because you do need to make him resilient to lightning damage, but the main defense for him here is going to be coming from Iralakesh with the endurance charge variants. Keep in mind there are 3 variants. There's one for each charge. We are looking specifically for the endurance charge variant because that allows him to count as having max endurance charges even though he doesn't have max endurance charges. Now we pair that with a Strangle Gasp with a +1 max endurance charge to give him 4 max. If you want him to be a bit more defensive or you think he's a bit squishy, you can still replace Leadership with another endurance charge anoint. I have felt comfortable with this. I have thrown him against the biggest lightning damage source I could think of, which is Uber Eater, and he did just fine. There was a portion because his life regen is still at 1,000 per second and he has like 5,000 life, where Uber Eater does a lot of damage like consistently. So you do have to use his convocation, the Tumi order, to just give him a bit of health top up to keep him alive in that one scenario, because it's a lot of damage. But other than that, if you're able to get more life regen than I do and still cap your res, then you shouldn't have any issues whatsoever. So that's the Strangle Gasp. We switch a Matua for more aura effect scaling. We have a lot of aura effect scaling from the Sovereignty, and we made sure we invested in more expensive rings that gave minus lightning res, but did not reduce his other resistances, so that it was easy to cap with just a rare glove and rare helmet, and it wouldn't cost too much to cap it with the rare helmet, because we didn't even necessarily need the third suffix. If we did not have these good rings, we would have to use the amulets, the minus lightning res amulets, or something else to get additional res, like plus res here. This has plus res, so that's very comfortable, and just stuff like that. Basically, you want to make sure you can cap his res as well as cap his negative lightning res before going for a Strangle Gasp. And then we went for a Combs Binding. Combs Binding is different from the last video. I did change it in the PoE. The reason for the Combs Binding is basically because it's a big defensive boost for us, and as well for him, because he's, I think, most vulnerable to physical damage. So being able to convert enemies to damage to fire means it is really good. Very strong defensive layer. And we go for a corrupted one that has Wrath aura effect. You want Wrath preferably 20%. You probably even want an 18% over Zealotry 20%. But eventually, if you go low enough, then you can go for Zealotry aura effect instead. But his ideal corruption is Wrath and Zealotry if you're going for double corrupted, but I didn't find any on trade, and that'd be really expensive, so just keep that in mind. That about covers the Mercenaries. Something else to note about the swap again is because we drop Purity of Elements, my minions are not elemental res capped. I think my Blasphemer, as an example, is like 30% lightning res, which is very bad. I had him die on an Uber Eater because I wasn't convocating. So for when you just swap, you will have to convocate a bit more because they're taking a lot more damage from elemental res. Eventually though, my next upgrades include getting bone rings with minion damage and attack speed, and more importantly, I think I want to get at least one of them that has a minion damage suffix. Now this should help all their elemental res, because bone rings come with the implicit elemental res. You can of course also use a gloam ring if you so choose. Either or. Gloam ring would also help against chaos damage taken, so that's the one advantage. You can use one gloam ring paired with one bone ring, and that is probably your ideal combo realistically. But once you figured out your minions res, you figured out your mercenaries res, everything is very smooth. And keep in mind, everything I said about them taking big chunks of damage is against the literal biggest source of lightning damage I could find when my minions were not res capped. In other next upgrade steps, I also plan on replacing my amulet. I'm still using a Jinx Juju, which is a very nice defensive layer, but eventually I want to switch on Unetor's Vow. I tested it yesterday, and I honestly prefer having Awakened Elemental Focus in the amulet over Empower, and the reason being is Empower makes them tankier, like my Wretched Defilers specifically, because they're the ones that will be supported. But it's less damage, and I think having more damage is what I would like to do. And to begin with, they weren't shocking for all that much because they hit a lot, but they don't hit for a huge amount, so their shock value itself is not that insane, and we are actually getting a lot of shock coming from our Mercenary instead. So this effectively means we do not lose out on shock, because our Mercenary is very effective at shocking with Doriani, and they would have even more damage than the initial PoB. But as a budget alternative, you still can get the replica Dragon Fangs flights with +3 to raise Spectres. I'm going straight to Unetor's personally, because I really like the defensive layer that Jinx Juju provides, and I can just stick out with that until I get the Unetor's Vow. On a little side note, now none of my clips are going to have this, but I have just, as I was recording this, bought a corrupted Doriani with 6% reduced lightning damage taken, which should also help your survivability in those scenarios that I pointed out, like Uber Eater and whatnot. And if you can't get reduced lightning damage, there's also reduced crits that would also come very, very handy. But yeah, I just felt like I should update that. None of the clips in this video have it, but it is something I now have. As usual, I'll be going live around when this video gets released, so feel free to stop by and see the build progress live, or ask any questions that you might have. If you made it this far, do consider liking and subscribing, as that helps out a lot. And with all that said, thank you for watching.